coming. It's a good crowd, especially for the end of the show, so we really appreciate you sticking around for this. My name is Allison O'Toole. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I am a comics editor with some experience in horror. I did a horror anthology called Shades of Fear last year. And just in the interest of keeping things going, I think we'll jump right in. Maybe each of our panelists could introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what draws you to horror and your history with the genre.
Hi, my name is Trevor Henderson. I guess I'm best known for creating spooky monsters on the internet that people really like. I wrote a kid's book called Scarewaves in Scholastic that's going to be released this October, God willing. And yeah, I guess I was introduced to horror at a really young age by my dad, who's also a really huge horror fan, so it's become like a very cozy thing for me. And I've just kind of loved it all my life. It's really like impacted my artistic career, and yeah, it's the best.
Hi, I'm Cleopatria Peterson. I don't think any of you know me. I am just a little guy. I do draw comics. There are like environmentally body horror elements to it that I portray. I just always loved horror. I think I have the privilege of like growing up in the 90s when we had, well, I'm from Toronto also, so we had YTV, and YTV would have like the 9 p.m. Dark Night. So like I just got, there was just like a bunch of creepy stuff at disposal growing up with TV then. I just always loved monsters and all like the creepy stuff, and that has now made me like this. So yeah, I just love horror.
I'm Jeff Lemire. I've done, I don't know, a lot of stuff, not all of it horror, but I've done a little bit of horror, especially in the last few years. I did a book called Gideon Falls, and I'm doing a thing called the Bone Orchard Mythos now, that are horror stories. And I mean, I've always loved the more lovable monsters like Sweet Tooth, but I do have a kind of a soft spot for horror. I love writing those darker, kind of intense stories. And unlike these guys, I was never really a horror fan. I was kind of too scared to watch horror movies as a kid, and maybe that's why I kind of like doing that, because it really kind of deeply affected me the other way, where I was so scared of them that I'm kind of curious about them, but too scared to watch them when I was younger. But then, you know, obviously as I got older, I kind of love stuff like David Lynch movies and things like that kind of have elements of horror in them, that are straight horror. So I kind of approach it from that place, I guess.
So I think it's interesting how we talked a little bit about our different sort of childhood relationships to horror. And I know I'm the same. Like, I was always fascinated by horror, but was always really scared of it. I had to kind of work my way up to it as I got a little bit older. But I noticed that horror is a big thing for a lot of kids, because I think like the world is so scary. Maybe it's a safer way to engage with those kinds of topics. Do you think that it's important to write kind of horror stories that kids can kind of like handle, that are aimed for them, or do you think, especially Trevor and Cleo, that it's good for kids to kind of be exposed to things that are maybe a little too old for them, and it helps them? What do you think is a better approach in terms of like parents that might be like interested in getting their kids into horror?
I think that it's incredibly important for kids to have horror and horror media at their disposal that doesn't talk down to them and really has those stakes. Like, the stakes are super important. And you know, they'll read the book ends, everyone's okay. But like, I think that kids really know when they're being talked down to as kids. And it's invaluable that kids at a very young age experience stuff that treats them as equals. And there's horror stories that have like that real danger and the real threat to them. And obviously, like, you know, every kid's different. There's gonna be stuff that some kids can handle and others can't. But I just think it's important to have that available to kids. Like, when I was a kid, I was terrified by the illustrations and scary stories tell in the dark, which I'm sure a lot of people here know what I'm talking about immediately. And I couldn't even look at some of those, they were so scary. But it was such I was so enthralled and fascinated by them, and you know, the stories too, but the illustrations really make those stories. And I was repulsed and enthralled at the same time. I couldn't even look at the spreads. but I now look back on it as such like a treasured thing, and like the danger I felt, like how scared I felt from that. And I think that is an experience all kids should have as an option. Yeah.
I think I have a unique experience as also working as a bookseller. So I am also always hand selling books to kids and parents and stuff, and it's like, you can't control it as much as you want to, and you don't know, everyone's different, so some people will be scared of things that aren't scary, that we would find scary. Like, everything is kind of different, and just like, I'm so grateful for that access I had to the horror genre growing up.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, as a bookseller also, like, I know that's the same for kids now too, but it's a bit different because everyone is ordering like Friday Nights at Freddy's chapter books and stuff is like, so I'm like, oh, I guess this is their Fear Street, because for me it was Fear Street and I'd get it at a Value Village store. But yeah, like, if they want it, they will find a way to get it anyway.
They're gonna get it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think like, I mean, as advice to like parents, I guess it's just like always be open to communicate with your children and not try to oppress them and like what they want to enjoy, but also, you know, like have real conversations where you don't belittle them, but like treat them almost like a peer and an equal. And I think you'll be able to have like a stronger relationship that way. But that's,
It'll backfire otherwise.
yeah, it might, yeah. And you're always gonna go through the teenage year where you're like, I hate my mom or something. Like, I feel like that's always gonna happen because like it's a lot, and that's a genre in itself in horror of like changing and growing up and not knowing what's happening. Like, there's so much horror is good at helping you clarify in the world in terms of things that aren't just black and white. Like, you can use it really well to help you explore themes that are actually really complicated, and that's why I really love it.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think the thing about horror or any genre is it's such a great vehicle to explore things that you're worried about or that are disturbing you or whatever. And the best horror for me is always the stuff that, you know, it's a way to process things you're scared about and kind of make sense of them in a way that makes it feel more comfortable and easy to process. So I think if kids have access to that, it's really valuable. And like they said, I think as a writer, if you're trying to write towards kids, it's probably not going to be scary anyway, and probably not going to be appealing to them. So for me, I always was drawn to stuff like above what I probably should have been reading a little bit, you know, and I think all kids are like that anyway. So yeah, like you said, not restricting them, kind of being open to, because every kid's different what they can handle too.
Yeah.
So just having a dialogue and not, yeah, if you forbid something, they're just going to want it more.
Yeah, I love your point, Cleo, about like clarifying, dealing with things that that frighten you. And I think that horror can sometimes have a bit of a reputation for being a very conservative genre because it's sort of, there are a lot of stories that have a reputation for like upholding the status quo, right? Like the things that scare us are the things that are other. So we see a lot of like racialized monsters and a lot of disabled monsters kind of in the history of horror. But there's also a long history of stories that subvert the status quo, right? And that are critiquing power structures, and that the monsters are the people in power using that power to harm and to oppress people. So when you're approaching a story in these sort of parallel traditions, how do you consider making a new monster particularly, and making sure that you're sort of considering the different ways it could be read in terms of like as a metaphor? Or is that something that you think about?
And it's the horror stuff I've done personally, so I can only speak to that, but I don't really generally have monsters in my stuff. It's usually some kind of like a cosmic, unknowable horror, which is maybe, that must be some reflection of how hopeless I feel like the monster or something. But so yeah, I think it's a little different for me, but maybe that answers the question. That's kind of the stuff that I tend to conjure up is something that's like, not quite, it's like beyond our understanding a little bit, and that's what makes it terrifying, which we can all relate to in whatever, such a terrifying world we live in most days. So, but yeah, so I don't often, when I do make actual monsters, they tend not to be in my horror stories. They're usually in other kinds of genres.
Yeah, when I'm making monsters, I definitely, you know, that's in the back of my head along with a lot of other things, because, you know, when I'm posting stuff online, there's like I have a big audience, so I really want to make sure that, you know, creatures and creature design can be, you know, not taken out of context, I guess. But when I'm doing monsters and stuff like that, I really try and balance like kind of comedy in horror in terms of like something that's so almost bordering on like surreal. It could be funny, but you know, in the circumstances being shown in a picture like or in a photo where you're seeing it like the end of a dark road or something, then that kind of scary becomes, that kind of thing that could be funny becomes scary. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I guess for me, I like exploring like who decides what a monster is. And I think that does come from being like a racialized and a trans queer person. Like I'm like, who decides that I'm wrong? And it's like exploring those themes. And for example, in like a werewolf novel I have, it's like kind of operating against like, why is this bad? Why is being the werewolf bad? And it's like those decisions are kind of like made for you by other people, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you feel about it. So kind of like challenging those ideas of monstrosity, because as Allison said, like sometimes like the cliches of monsters can be like, oh, this person is disabled or racialized, of like sleepaway camp, etc. Like all of those like things, those tropes that, you know, go against like equality and like other things, like they should be challenged, and that's kind of what I try to do in my writing work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're talking about who gets to define what's normal.
Yes.
Excuse me. And I think that like that concept of normal versus abnormal gets into like the idea of the uncanny, right? Like something that is frightening because it's so close to something that's familiar, but it's slightly different, which again is how like in the past we lead to someone with like facial difference, for example, and it's like, oh, that's abnormal and therefore scary, right? But I also like, as an extension of that, I think it's interesting that like it's very easy to slightly tweak the human body to make that frightening. Like someone with a smile that's too big, or has too many teeth, or too many fingers, as we're seeing in a lot of like creepy AI creations. So again, like this is, I think both in writing and in visual design, how do you take, again, a genre that has a lot of tropes and a lot of history that we can refer to, so that we're sort of playing with visuals and story beats that exist that we can repurpose, versus trying to inject like complete originality. Because you were saying, like Jeff, that so much of what you're trying to work with is stuff that's scary because it's unknowable, which in a way is very relatable. So where do you sort of get that inspiration in terms of like drawing on and playing with existing ideas versus trying to do something that's like original, or something that's not knowable or can't be felt tangibly in that same way?
Boy, it's tough. I mean, that's what you're always trying to do is
Find a balance. Yeah.
Try to make something unique and original. I do find that horror in particular in comics is a hard genre to do well, because so much of horror, the stuff that's really effective that I've experienced is usually like in film or TV, and sound is such a huge part of it, and we don't have that in comics. So you're dealing with different ways of trying to scare a reader. You can't do jump scares the same way and things. So it's a tricky medium. Luckily, I think all the horror stuff I've done are in collaborations with other artists, and I work with an Italian artist named Andrea Sorrentino, who's kind of this visual genius. To be honest, a lot of the stuff, it's me getting him prompts that maybe sometimes are somewhat cliched or could be cliched in different hands, and he'll take them in really wild, mind-bending directions and feel really fresh. So that's a real collaboration between us. So I don't know I can fully answer, but I think, that's always a struggle, just trying to keep the stories feeling authentic and unique, and sometimes playing off old tropes, but trying to find new twists or new ways of executing them. It usually just comes from making them really as personal as you can, or as character-based as you can, as opposed to high concept.
Yeah, because that's a lot of your writing, right? It comes from very like personal sort of character.
You try to build real characters and then have these horrors be things that are sort of metaphors for whatever they're struggling with. Is kind of where I approach it, from character-based stuff more than like the concept of the monster or whatever. That stuff is usually comes after.
Mhm.
Like you build stuff that reflects whatever the characters are experiencing.
Yeah, so it's scary because you're seeing the, like they're dealing with something that's frightening for them, rather than the concept is like in and of itself.
Yeah, and if you do
Yeah.
the characters well, then the reader connects with them and they feel this. They feel it through the characters.
Mm-hmm. Like, Cleo, your work is also very like personal a lot of the time with horror, right?
Yeah, I think for me, as a horror fan, you eat a lot of dirt.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like to say, as a horror fan, I am always being hate crimed because like there is a lot of garbage out there. Like you have to dig a lot to find the like good stuff that resonates with you. I'm also just a very picky person, and I guess I have really high standards, which for the horror genre can be very hard. So I guess to speak to kind of working with like what is already laid out there. Like for me, I love werewolves a lot, but werewolf movies suck so bad. Like so bad. We don't agree on the good werewolf movies. That's a conversation for later. But so I guess I think, and I have to bring the personal into it because that's just the kind of artist that I am. And going back to like the diversity win that I am is like I know it's important to put who I am into my work because I don't often see who I am represented at all whatsoever. And I wouldn't be able to make work that was disingenuine. Like that's just not the type of artist that I could be. So yeah, there's always something to what I'm creating, but I also try, I think, to put comedy in it. Something that like Trevor was saying, like kind of like the uncanny switch, like yes, this can be funny, but also it's super real and also it's super horrific. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, but
You can have like you were saying, comedic stuff, but like in the way it'll play off characters, it can become horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about, you have to bring your own personal stuff into it no matter what. You can play off the old tropes and that can be really successful specifically. But like if you're not coming from what personally scares you, then it's gonna feel disingenuous and you won't get that certain quality where it'll resonate, I think.
Yeah. And Jeff, I like some of the stuff you were saying, like when we have these superstar artists like Sorrentino, like Stephen Gamel, who did the Scary Stories Tell the Dark Stories. I think that those, these are like really clear images, and I'm sure everybody in the audience has some other examples of just art that in and of itself is like so terrifying and scary just for how talented the art is, or the artist is rather. But I think it's interesting because I think you're right that horror, the sound, particularly in film and TV, is so effective, and in prose we can get these descriptions of something that's almost impossible to put on a page visually.
Yeah.
But I think we also do have there's a lot of strength in comics for particularly very atmospheric, as we've been talking about, very like character-driven horror. So I was wondering if you could talk on any of the panelists on what are some unique qualities that comics can bring to horror that maybe other genres can't do, rather than looking at it as like only the way that maybe comics are limited compared to other media.
I'm going to defer to these two pros because much more comic experience than me.
I mean, just looking at like the mechanics of comics, which I do a lot, because one thing we have that prose and cinema don't have is the page turn.
Yeah.
So the page turn is a very simple but effective way to freak people out if you use it properly. You can slowly build, and if they haven't skimmed ahead, you can get them, so that's a good one. And I mean, it's tricky. It's hard to pinpoint other things that are unique to comics, I think the combination of imagery and internal monologue, which is kind of like, you can get the internal monologue in prose, and you can get the imagery in cinema, but you can't really have the combination of both. So you can often play the imagery off whatever the text is in interesting ways, not just with horror, but that's just comics in general. But if you're tied to horror, having someone's internal, terrified, frantic monologue going with certain images can be really effective, or counterplaying it and having images that are not horrific, but thoughts that are, you can just play with that stuff, and it's a tool to use for sure.
Yeah.
I I think because it is an art form, like style is also really effective that way, like not in the same way that film would be, whereas like you, like 80s, you have beautiful acrylic blood or all of those things, like, and for me, I think I find the most terrific comics to be black and white, just because you get to lay down those heavy shadows and inks, and it makes it really kind of, there's just something about it, like that stark contrast that it makes the horror of it really effective, and like manga does this really well. And I think because like you can have a comic that does have like very realistic images and portrayals of horror, but you can also, like Junji Ito is one of my favorite artists, and just kind of like the way you can subvert things, like, oh, the hair is like twirling, like in Uzumaki and stuff, like your body is breaking, like, and like that comic does not transfer well to a film, even though they've made a film, but like those type, like that's why the comic is so good at that form of portraying that kind of horror story. Yeah, I guess it's just like, it's a visual language that has a lot of strengths that it takes from film in itself, but is portraying with text on the page. And that's why I love it, because it's like you have writing and you have image, and it's all there. And it doesn't take really, it takes long, but it doesn't, like, as much as a film takes, like, films take so long.
I think
so many parts.
the thing too, this is not specific to art, but comics in general, what I always loved, and I'm sure most people do, is that the artist's individual style is almost, it's so personal, it's almost like their handwriting or something. They're all so different, and so it's very visceral, and there's a direct connection between you and the artist that you don't have in prose, because even if the writer has a really unique style, you're still seeing a set, text on the page. You're not seeing like their handwriting. And in cinema, it's photographs, so it is still, even with special effects and everything, it's still based on reality. Whereas every comic, every artist has like a very unique style. So there's a connection to the artist that's very visceral, which with like in horror or any genre, but horror can be very kind of effective, and there's a personal connection to the artist or the author that is there that's not there in other mediums.
Every pen stroke is personal, like, in a very specific way you couldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree, and I think like Emily Carroll, another elephant in the room we haven't mentioned.
So good.
I think she's joked that like part of her style, her distinct style, is that she doesn't use perspective. But that's so distinct. But like, I don't care. I don't need it. Like, no one needs perspective if they're reading an Emily Carroll comic, right?
That's the thing. If someone's artwork connects emotionally with you, doesn't matter how realistic it is or how well drafted it is. I mean, my stuff is an example of that. It's not always beautiful in like the traditional way, but it has a certain emotional quality that can connect with an audience much more than super hyper realistic.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that as you say, that style is so personal, and I think that a level of abstraction can also allow you to like play with form, particularly like the human body and things like that in a really interesting way. And I would add too, I think comics, I think Cleo was sort of touching on this with like Ito, I think is such a good example, and how his work just does not translate outside of comics, because you're sort of trapped in these moments, right? You have to decide when you're drawing a comic which moments you will show to build that tension. And then when you have that release of tension, there's just nowhere you can go. Like, you're just stuck in this horrifying image, right? Which I think is very unique to comics. But here's something about, to continue talking about art, and Trevor, I think you can speak on this quite thoroughly. When people talk about horror films, the benefits between showing the monster and not showing the monster, right? This is a permanent debate. And so again, when you're doing like a static image or a series of static images, how do you decide when you want to suggest versus something that you want to show?
Oh yeah, that's extremely important, both in like art, like the kind of art I do, and also in film. There have been a lot of movies where it's clear that, like a horror movie or a monster movie, where it's very clear that they don't want to show the monster and they're getting by on atmosphere and it's very effective. But then a studio head or a production or a producer's like, we gotta show the monster. And then even if they show it for like a split second, it can be too much and it ruins the movie specifically for me. It's happened a lot.
What do you have in mind? The way you're smiling tells me there's like something that you really have a bone to pick with.
There's this one movie by Larry Fessenden, who's a really good indie horror director. He's done a lot of really good stuff. I forget the name of it. It's like The Last Broadcast or The Last something. But it's this Arctic set kind of eco horror with this kind of like The Thing, but like a little more DIY with these men going missing in the Arctic and not really sure what's happening. And it's super mysterious, it's super atmospheric and great. And then at the end, they show like these CGI caribou monsters. It's the stupidest thing. It sounds so bad. And it's very clear, like you can almost feel the director being forced to do it off screen. You know, and there are a lot of other examples in film, especially where like, you know, it's more or less shown, but it's a tightrope to walk. And when I'm designing a monster, it's a, and you know, putting an art piece online, it's a, especially when I'm using a photo, because I don't know if everyone knows here, I do digital art, but I also do photo-based stuff where I'll take a photo of like a shadowy driveway or something, and then kind of just try and match a creature in there as best as possible by like texture and light and color and tone, and just make it feel like it was always there. And there's been a lot of times where I'll draw a monster I'm really proud of and like design a lot, I want to show it off, but like it just doesn't make sense you would see that much of it. So you have to like paint out a lot of it and black out a lot of it and make it purposefully more ambiguous. And I think that's almost always the better decision, because it just gives the person who is seeing this image that much more rope to make it personal for them and to make that monster kind of bespoke to the person who's seeing it, custom, rather than if I just done a design, even if it's a design I'm super proud of. So sometimes I'll do like the really spooky, mysterious one. And if I really like the creature, I'll be like, here's the proper drawing. Be proud of it.
It's and Cleo, you do art as well, but I know you do prose, and Jeff, you're writing a lot more horror these days than drawing, but is that something that you also would consider, like how much to reveal, or are you more concerned with the kind of emotional reality and figuring out the how to show it later on?
That's a good question. I mean, drawing is so much different than writing for me. For writing, I'm writing it from a perspective where you are with the character very personally, so it is like so much their voice and what they're going through. So I guess that's more the emotional. So with the showing, I guess, I don't know that I've really drawn any comics. I guess I've drawn scary comics, sure. I guess so. I think so. I guess, I don't know, I think pacing is such a huge thing. And pacing, the ambiguity for sure, and just kind of keeping the reader on their toes, you don't know where, I don't want the reader to know where it's going. I want them to be surprised, or I just want, I want it to be creepy and spooky. I just want to draw fun, spooky, creepy things. I think that's all I really want to do, because my art style is very detailed illustrations, and my prose is just kind of funny. I don't know. But yeah, I try to approach how I create things with pacing pretty importantly. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think that's how I approach it. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the build-up is always scarier than the reveal often, so that's really what it's all about, the build-up. And I'm always much less is more with revealing a monster or whatever the horror is,
Whenever you show the monster, it's like turning the light on in the room. And it almost never can live up to what was suggested, I think.
Yeah, especially now we've seen every version of every monster that could be, and
more or less, yeah.
For the most part, so it's often, especially when it's not done well, it's just some derivative version of something you've already seen in another film, so it's not really gonna scare you. Yeah.
So if that is the case, and if we think we've kind of seen everything, I think that's true. There's a sense of feeling jaded sometimes. You'll pick up something sometimes and see something really original, but often it feels like you've seen it before. So do you think then that it becomes more important to establish that empathy and make it a personal feeling kind of reaction rather than a visual visceral reaction, or how do you sort of thread that needle then?
Well, I think that's with any genre though, that's the more you can connect with the characters, especially the more whatever genre is gonna click, So, but I think with horror, it's all context is a lot of it too. You can even take a monster or a scenario we're familiar with, but if you can do it in a unique or different context that you haven't seen before, it can become scary all over again.
I think, what was I gonna say? Can you repeat the question?
Well, yeah, just if the monster in and of itself doesn't seem
Right.
as capable of like scaring as maybe it would have in like the 1930s when everyone like fainted watching Dracula or whatever, then like, yeah, do you focus more on building empathy either for the characters fighting the monster or for the monster themselves in order to like evoke fear and
Right.
response?
I think using emotional tethers in any work you create is the most important thing you can do. I think that just makes good art. I think when you can show like compassion towards the art you're putting in the world, no matter if it's like writing, comics, anything, I think when you love what you're doing, it really does come through. So in regards to like a monster, like sometimes the movies where we are showing the empathy or whatever to the monsters are really good, but also sometimes movies where it's just like there's blood everywhere are also really good. Like you can have both.
Both at the same time. It's like,
Yeah. But yeah, so I think like yeah, I favor having an emotional connection to whatever I'm engaging with in any form of art, and that applies to horror as well.
That's what they both said is, the emotional connection it should be the absolute most important thing. And if you have that emotional connection to characters or, story, then you can forget pretty much anything else, I think.
Yeah.
You can have a design you've seen before for a monster, say, if you care about those characters and it matters to the characters more than the viewer or reader about what's happening. You'll feel that.
Yeah, that's why I'll never get tired of vampire stories.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a classic for a reason.
So I think just because we're starting to run short on time, so while we're talking about empathy and sympathy for monsters, a question near and dear to my heart, which monster do you think would give the best kisses and why? I would like to propose Alien because he has 2 mouths.
I mean, Dracula or a vampire is always
A
a
classic,
great
yeah.
kiss.
That's true, that's their whole thing.
Your last kiss.
Cleo, I know you've thought long and hard about this.
I'm still thinking.
Werewolves.
I do love werewolves, but like in terms of kissing, like werewolves would be good with tongue.
They
But
have lips a lot of the time, so.
yeah, they have snouts and
Snouts.
A Lon Chaney or Benicio del Toro werewolf
That's
has
true.
lips.
like.
I heard an ooh, yes.
Yeah.
I saw that Gabber remake.
Listen, I love all monsters. I'm monster fluid. I don't get why do we have to put 2 girl bosses against each other?
So true.
Do you distinguish between wolf men or wolf people and werewolves? Because for me, those are 2 different things.
I'm fascinated by why you love werewolves so much. I want to hold down.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
oh,
It's not that.
That's what's up.
Why do I love? It's actually interesting because I used to like not love werewolves as much as I love vampires. But I think just like this like werewolves is like this vessel of storytelling of like your body changing or
Right.
whatever. I love Ginger Snaps. Ginger Snaps is iconic.
The best girl movie.
And seeing that as a teenager also, and it's like in like Ontario, and I'm from Ontario. You're just like we are having the same experience. We're not, but like, like it just like really spoke to me. And then actually like what made me like kind of feel passionate about werewolves is I watched the 3rd Ginger Snaps and it was so bad. It made me so mad that it was so bad. I was like, I have to fix the genre. So that's like what inspired me to write like my werewolf novel that I'm working on. And just kind of like, I don't know, there's so much you can do with it. And like I said, going back to like how I like the who decides who the monster is, and everyone decides the werewolf is the monster, and everyone wants the werewolf to change back to who they were. It's always a problem. But it doesn't have to be. And I want to see explorations of that where it isn't that. So that's what I approach with writing it. And that, like I really like Good Manners. It's like Good Manners is a great movie. It is it's a musical werewolf lesbian French movie that if you haven't seen it you should. And like it's kind of about like this woman who ends up taking care of like this little werewolf child and dealing with like a child growing up and all of it. It's just a really good movie. You should really watch it. But like I really loved how it approached werewolves in such a different light than what we're used to. So I would highly recommend that. And that's, I hope that tells some people why I like werewolves.
That's a good answer.
Thank you. Trevor, who do you want to kiss?
I'm open to all. I'm very.
We're both monster fluid.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe Bigfoot. Not sure. Bigfoot seems.
Big arms.
Monster or
hold you.
cryptid though? Are we gonna try that?
I'll allow it.
They're
Okay.
ones.
I'll allow it.
Okay.
Well, thank you for answering that very deep and complex question.
Yeah.
The other panel caught you off guard with that one. So we do have a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions. I think we've got some volunteers with microphones at this side, so if you just want to raise a hand, we can run a mic up to you. Or, yes, I think in the hat up here.
Hi.
Oh.
Quick question of general opinion and thoughts about slashers
Oh, okay. Interesting.
and the use of like very human monsters in the situation of those movies and how they do tend to get more monstrous as the series go along.
I mean, for me, I don't even think of them in the same. They're like their own whole thing with a whole, especially slashers, with a very specific set of rules, which is a lot of the appeal for me of the slasher. But yeah, they're very different. I never think of a slasher as a monster per se, even when they are very clearly supernatural. I think the slasher is its own supernatural entity, I guess. But it's very interesting that what you brought up about them becoming more and more, I guess, monstrous in appearance as they go on. I don't know. I think of them as something different, I guess.
Yeah, slashers do have very like rigid rules and
Yeah.
like as insofar as like horror movies, and it's kind of hard to separate them from those tropes.
Yeah, and they're also, like, slashers especially are super thorny with a lot of the stuff we've been talking earlier about, you know, how monsters are portrayed sometimes in not the best way.
I think a lot of people who aren't really into horror per se, but when they think of horror, they just think of slashers.
They
and
do,
that's
they really
too-
shouldn't. It's not great. Yeah.
I'm the worst one to ask because I grew up in the 80s and I was so scared of those movies. I'd see the commercials would come on and I would hide in my bed or whatever. And then, but I was also kind of fascinated, so I'd ask my friends who'd seen them, and they'd tell me what happened in the movie, and that's even scarier than the movie.
Was it Freddy?
So I've still never seen a slasher movie. Ever.
Interesting. Yeah.
My favorite slasher movie is Scream.
Scream's a good one.
But like, they're just, I think because like there are such strict rules in a slasher, it does feel like once you've seen one, you've seen them all kind of deal, which isn't necessarily true, but like, they kind of bore me a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's true, but for me, like, it can be both a pro and a con because it's like eating a McDonald's cheeseburger.
Yeah,
Because
you
you
know
know
what you're
exactly
getting
what you're
into
getting.
with the
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it can be cozy in a weird way, I guess.
It's almost comforting.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And sometimes you get a weird one like Dream Warriors, right?
Second best in the franchise.
Yeah. Did we have any other over here?
Hi. When I was probably about 8, my aunt put on American Werewolf in London to keep me busy, and I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. It really, really messed me up, and I'm fine now. But which movie did you watch when you were too young that really, really got you?
Oh, I saw Black Christmas, the original, when I was like 9 or 10, and that is still to this day like top 3 scary.
That's the best slasher movie, actually.
It is
tried
perfect.
my streaming Black
Everything
Christmas is the
Halloween
best.
has, Black Christmas should have. It did it first. It did it better. It did it in a more interesting way, and it's way scarier.
Shout out to Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto.
It's also Trump.
Oh god. I honestly, Pumpkinhead.
Hey, Pumpkinhead's a great movie.
It scared the shit out of me. I was just like a little kid over at like my friend's house. I think they were like babysitting me and they were watching. I was like, this is the most horrific thing I've ever seen. And also Independence Day. I think I'm
The
realizing
building gets blown up.
was just the whole movie. It was loud. I don't know. I didn't like it. I don't really like sci-fi horror that much, so maybe this is why.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was this.
I was too scared to watch them, so. But I remember this is not really a horror movie, but the Who Framed No Incredible Hulk TV show, when he would change and his eyes would go green, I was so scared. So that really messed me up.
I also wasn't a horror movie, but I saw Jumanji when I was 3 or 4, and to this day, I have 2 kinds of nightmares. One is that I'm like late for whatever it is I'm worried about that I have to get up for, like a panel or something. I dream I'm late for it, or something with a big animal chasing me.
Nice.
Did we have any other hands, or?
There's a couple of them.
Oh, so sorry. Yes. In the front in the blue or the teal maybe.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, like, in terms of like creating horror in the comics genre, when you can see both pages like spread out in front of you, if you have any tips for like creating tension and creating suspense, because I feel like in movies, so much of what scares me personally is like sound and like not knowing what's about to happen. But on a comic page, like you can see what is about to happen. But like I think that you're able to create a lot of interesting sort of tension in that. And I was wondering if you had any like tips or thoughts on that, I guess. Yeah.
I think building mood, right? I think it's just making sure you get in there with your atmosphere. So how you can pace by like control the pacing. So using bigger or smaller panels and sort of encouraging the reader to stay with you. I know that a lot of comics will use contrast between very heavy and very light detail. Again, that's kind of a manga thing, but controlling the speed that the eye flows across the page in that way, I think can be really effective.
Yeah, also,
No, go ahead.
I think also to that, like overwhelming someone can also add to that fear. Like you really have that power in creating comics to do that, and like the size of your panels. Are they claustrophobic? Do you want that person to feel claustrophobic? Where are you cropping? You can really think of film in a lot of ways in translating to creating comics. At least that's how I try to approach it. Like, is it a close-up shot? Is it far away? And like, I think if you can study the films that you're watching and enjoying and apply the type of framing that they have to the type of comic work you're doing, that'll be really effective. I'm gonna share some advice that is stolen from Key and Peele, and they said this at the Wendell and Wild panel, and it was about how to write effective comedy and how to write effective horror. This is exactly the same. And you start at a 0, you go to a 25, you go to 50, and then you go to 1,000, and you just you start small, and then you just keep getting more crazy with what you're doing, and that's how effectively you can end up scaring someone. Like, it starts normal, and then it gets worse. And I thought that was really brilliant advice, so I thought I would just say it here, but it's not mine. I'm just passing it along.
I was just gonna say, kind of like echoing what has already been said, that when you're doing comics, you have to choose very specifically what images you show, and just being really cognizant of the implicit what's happening in between those images, like the time passing, or what you're not seeing, just to kind of build atmosphere, I guess.
Do you have thoughts on that as well, Jeff? I know that's a thing in any comic, right, where there's a worry that they could look at the next page.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the page turn, obviously, is very important, but the build to the page turn is more important than whatever the scary thing is. So it's all, the size of panels is actually very effective. The amount of panels on a page, because that slows the reader down.
Yeah.
Or, so those are all things, that's just the language you're working with, so, yeah.
I still think the most effective page, I'll never forget it. I still remember it, reading it in a sun-dappled afternoon in my childhood bedroom, was a Junji Ito story called The Enigma of Salt. And it has the scariest page turn I've ever seen in manga or horror comics ever. It lives with me forever.
Such a good pull.
Yeah.
I think we had someone just a couple rows back, right, in the hat?
For me, I guess psychological horror would be the most frightening of all the variations. And the collaboration between Jeff and Sorrentino is a great example of that. I must admit I'm a little behind on my reading of Gideon Falls, but the first volume, the Black Barn, is it's brilliantly evocative, and it's a great example of, I think, of what, if you show less, then it often is more horrific. Like the door of the Black Farm in itself is almost like this monolithic thing of this unknowable, unspeakable thing. Like, and also, I guess what I'm driving at is, and this is directed more towards Jeff, is I noticed that you explore themes of like mental illness sometimes, and I noticed when you were writing for the Joker character, you did a bit of that as well, and I appreciate that you don't romanticize or trivialize it. And I was just wondering, like, is that a conscious decision on your part, or is this just more of an organic exploration?
Very much
of
so
those?
with those characters, because, well, specifically the Joker, I never really liked that character all that much, you know. But the artist I worked with really wanted to do a Joker story, so like, okay, so it was like, how do I do something that hadn't been done with that character? So just approaching it from a more sympathetic place, which you often don't see with that character. So that specifically to that, you know, it was a very conscious thing. Yeah.
I think we've all seen, whether writing or seeing examples where, like, mental illness is also been another thing that we were kind of talking about, with a lot of disability that's really demonized, and I think that there's ways to do it sympathetically, but you have to sort of start from a place of people with mental, like, who are neuroatypical are just people also, and not monsters, and I feel like that's a good starting point for a story like that, right? We have a couple more. I think I'm told we're sort of wrapping up, but I think we can probably take these last two questions and then we'll have to get going. So there's one here in the white mask and one in the hat with the padded mask. Oh.
I'm so sorry. There you go.
Hi, so this might be a little bit of a weird question, but inspired by the first mention you made about children and horror, and not only introducing children to horror stories, but also talking about children-friendly media that have certain things or scenes or stories that impact them as much as any slasher or any like horror movie. So I work in animation, in the animation industry, and here in Vancouver it tends to be very focused on preschool shows. And as somebody who's interested in horror and grew up in not watching horror, but watching a lot of media from the 80s and the 90s that contain things that now we go, that's a little bit traumatizing.
Yeah.
But I had stories that would make you go back, and even if you were terrified, you would still like check it out because you were fascinated by it. It seems like now there's a lot of children's media that are scared of putting any sort of conflict, anything that might even just upset the young children. I guess it also depends on the target audience. Sorry, so my question is, as somebody who will like to defend certain choices in stories that either I'm working on or I'm working on a team and we want to push an idea, and some higher up says, oh no, that's too horrible, that's too scary, all the children are going to be turned off by that. How do you defend that? What would you say? What kind of defense would you give if you had to like defend making horror for children? So we're questions, sorry.
It's kind of a tough one, because I think that we're all sort of coming from the perspective of making our own work, and I think when you have probably several levels of people making those choices, it's a little tougher to be the one pushing for that. But I don't know. That is a tough one.
I think currently in our times where we're dealing with things are being banned and like everything's sanitized, like it's hard when like art is so tied to profit.
Yes.
When art is tied to profit, because they're just like, oh, if this can speak to everybody, we get so much money. But it's like, that's not what art is. Like, of course, artists need to make money, and that's all I want. I wish I could be rich and have a lot of money for making my art. But like what are we losing when these stories, especially on a team, are being like just like made into these like
Cookie
things,
cutter.
like these little cookie cutter things that don't mean anything. It's just like a quick thing, and like I'm thinking of like the cartoons I watched when I was like growing up, like Mona the Vampire was the best. Like I love Mona the Vampire, or like Ghost Rider even, like on PBS, and like Ghost Rider had one of the scariest episodes of my life, which is like with Gus the gooey gray monster.
Yeah.
He scared the shit out of me, but like I don't know, I think that whole story had like a message about like helping your friends and stuff. Like I don't know, like I think I don't know, it's hard when I think you just have to like speak from like your heart and like your gut and defend what you believe in. Like you should never compensate or settle unless you don't have the privilege or the safety to do so. Like it's very hard for me to like just settle and compensate, especially for things I don't think are right. So if you have the power to do that, that is what I would recommend doing. I'm not saying it won't backfire. It's very possible it might, but you might feel better having had defended what you wanted to.
I just think kids will seek out this stuff. Like they want to be challenged in these ways, in these safe ways, through media, and they'll get to it one way or the other. And I think that if you can do that in at least a semi-controlled way, in this way where it's personal and meaningful, I think that's really important.
I think we have one last question and then we'll get going.
Yeah, hi. So it sounds like some of you work more in print and some of you work more posting your work online. And thinking of like Emily Carroll and her work, like I think Some Other Animals Meet, for example, wouldn't work not as a webcomic as well. And like her most recent publication on her website had me doing like Neopets puzzle plot shit.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you had any thoughts on like publishing on horror comics online versus on page, and how that might change the experience for you.
I think that's any comics, right? Like I think that they're different, depends on how you want to get it to your audience, and as well as length. Something longer you might want like to print and be able to sell that way, but if you just want to make something that's especially something smaller and you just want to be able to get into people's hands, then digital is definitely the fastest way, right?
I think it's just another way to get to people, unless you're really, like that Emily Carroll comic you brought up, really playing with the format, like with the fake ads and stuff, which was brilliant. Then it's just another way of getting it to the reader with some pros and cons, I guess.
Like you can have like I feel like it's like you can do whatever you want, but I think using it as like if you're using a digital format, like I think it's really fun when people put like GIFs in their comics or whatever, and that's so effective for horror. Like hello, jump scare.
Yeah.
I remember reading all of John Dies at the End before it got published as a book on like it wasn't Geosites, but as a blog, and like if you scrolled past a certain point on a certain page, like there would be a ghost face that like popped up under the writing at you, and that was scary. Like those are kind of, and I miss that. I don't think that happens as much, and I don't know, I miss stuff like that. Like I don't know, form media is a message for Marshall McLuhan. Like you can use the media in such a full potential, and Twitch games, like interactive Twitch games. My uncle who works at Nintendo, like like stuff like that. Like when you can force the reader into like these kind of control circumstances where they make the choice to go forward, and that forward choice can be scary. Like those are effective ways to kind of utilize it.
Did you ever read the Korean webcomic where the girl's walking?
Oh yeah.
And when you scroll it, it turns and doesn't.
Scary.
Yeah.
Scary.
You gotta start putting that into like EPUBs. Like,
Yeah.
being able to be reading on my Kindle like a ghost face.
You've mostly done for print, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you had something you published, Little Monsters was originally digital,
No,
was it not?
I did a book called Snow Angels, a sci-fi
Oh, Snow
book that we
Angels,
did digitally first, but I don't know that we fully embraced the medium. It has so much potential to like be, use the medium in a unique way, and I kind of just did comics as comics on it. But,
Yeah.
But when you're writing like 9 series at a time, you gotta stick with what you know sometimes. Well, thank you so much for coming, everyone. We kept you a little extra time. There's not much time left in the festival, but we'll be. I know I'm just walking around. Cleo, are you still at?
I'm in the wondrous abyss at WA2. Come roleplay marketplace with me and give me money.
Trevor and Jeff, are you at tables or are you walking the floor for the rest of the
I
show?
got them all done, but
Cool.
yeah.
I wasn't even tabling this year, I was walking around.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So you can come say hi if you'd like and enjoy the rest of the last 30 minutes of the show, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, guys.
Hey.